The average human will spend roughly 43,000 hours of their life in a state of active nothingness. This is a behavior that consumes 20% of your total metabolic energy despite producing zero physical output. You are doing it right now. You have done it every day since you were born, and your ancestors did it for 6 million years before you. If you tried to turn it off, your brain would treat the absence of this behavior like a lack of oxygen. You would feel a rising sense of panic, a physical itch in your skull that no amount of willpower can soothe. You aren't eating, you aren't sleeping, and you aren't reproducing. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, you are wasting the most precious resource you have. Yet, if a prehistoric human had stopped doing this for even an hour, you would not be here today. It is the behavior that built the world, and it is the behavior that is currently rewriting the way your brain functions. We call it distraction or scrolling or boredom, but those are modern names for an ancient survival mechanism that was never meant to have a finish line. You are trapped in a loop that kept your species alive, and you are carrying a prehistoric survival tool into a world that has turned it against you. You might think this is just a fancy way of describing a modern lack of focus. But it is actually the opposite of a focus problem. Most people believe that our ancestors were these hyper-focused, stoic creatures who only moved when they needed to hunt or gather. We have this image of a hunter-gatherer standing perfectly still, eyes locked on a target, with a mind as quiet as a lake. That image is a complete fabrication. If you actually look at the data from modern foraging groups like the Hadza or the Tsimane, you see something very different. These people are not focused on one thing. They are focused on everything. They are in a state of constant, rhythmic surveillance. They are monitoring the flight paths of birds, the way the wind moves through a specific type of acacia tree, and the subtle shift in the tone of a companion's voice. Researchers have found that for most of human history, we didn't have a focus problem because we didn't have a focus requirement. We had a surveillance requirement. Your brain was designed to be a wide-angle lens, not a laser pointer. When you feel that twitch to check your surroundings or your phone, you aren't failing to pay attention. You are successfully running an ancient program designed to ensure that nothing in your environment changes without you knowing about it. The problem is that in the modern world, the environment never stops changing. However, knowing that we are wired for surveillance doesn't explain why it feels so compulsive. In fact, for a long time, scientists thought this behavior was a form of pure, unadulterated pleasure-seeking. In 1954, two researchers at McGill University, James Olds and Peter Milner, stumbled upon the biological engine that drives this. They were trying to study the brain's learning centers by placing electrodes in the brains of rats. By total accident, they placed one electrode in a tiny region called the septal area, which is part of the system that processes rewards. They gave the rat a lever that, when pressed, would send a tiny pulse of electricity into that spot. What happened next remains one of the most famous and haunting moments in neuroscience. The rat stopped eating. It stopped drinking. It ignored females in heat. It ignored its own pups. It just pressed the lever. Some of the rats pressed the lever 7,000 times in a single hour. They pressed it until their paws were literally bloody and they collapsed from exhaustion. For decades, this study was cited as the discovery of the pleasure center. The world assumed the rat was pressing the lever because it felt incredible. We thought the rat was experiencing a state of pure bliss that was better than food or sex. That sounds like a logical explanation for why we can't put our phones down, but it turns out to be fundamentally wrong. In the late 1980s, Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan began to look closer at what those rats were actually experiencing. He realized that the brain's reward system isn't one single thing. It is divided into two very different circuits, liking and wanting. Liking is the feeling of satisfaction you get when you finally eat a meal or reach a goal. It's governed by opioids in the brain. But wanting is something else entirely. Wanting is the itch. It's the drive to get the thing. It's governed by dopamine. When Olds and Milner stimulated those rats, they weren't giving them pleasure. They were giving them a massive, artificial dose of wanting. The rats weren't pressing the lever because they felt good. They were pressing the lever because they felt like they were just about to feel good. They were trapped in a state of permanent anticipation. They were seeking a reward that never actually arrived. This is the seeking circuit. It is the most powerful motivational force in the human brain, and its job is not to make you happy. Its job is to make you look. Searching for new information seems like a logical way to satisfy that seeking circuit, but our ancestors weren't looking for facts. They were looking for survival advantages. In 1999, two researchers at Xerox PARC, Peter Paroli and Stuart Card, proposed a theory that explains why your brain treats a new notification the same way a prehistoric human treated a berry bush. They called it information foraging theory. They realized that humans evolved to hunt for information using the exact same mathematical strategies that other animals use to hunt for food. Imagine a bird looking for worms in a field. The bird has to decide how long to stay in one patch of grass before moving to the next. If it stays too long, it wastes time on a patch that's already empty. If it leaves too soon, it misses out on easy calories. Evolution tuned the bird's brain to find the perfect balance. Paroli and Card found that humans do the same thing with information. We are informivores. We treat a new piece of data as a literal calorie for the mind. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a social media post and a track in the mud that leads to a gazelle. Both trigger the same dopamine spike. Both signify a potential change in your survival status. Scanning for data was a matter of life and death, but for our ancestors, the environment was mostly stable. However, even in a stable world, the cost of being wrong was infinite. Think about the savannah 200,000 years ago. If you were sitting by a watering hole and you heard a rustle in the tall grass, you had two choices. You could ignore it and keep resting, or you could look. If it was just the wind, you wasted a tiny bit of energy looking. But if it was a leopard and you didn't look, your life ended. Evolution does not reward accuracy, it rewards survival. This created a massive biological bias toward the seeking circuit. It programmed the human brain to assume that any new information is potentially life-saving. For millions of years, this was a perfect system because the amount of new information was limited. The wind didn't rustle every 3 seconds. A new bird didn't fly over every minute. Your brain could run the surveillance program, find nothing, and then go back into a state of low-power rest. There was a natural ceiling on how much information you could forage. A predator in the grass is terrifying, but a predator can only kill you once. There was something in the ancient world that was much more dangerous than a leopard, and it required even more constant surveillance. That danger was other people. For a social primate, being cast out of the group was a death sentence. You couldn't survive the savannah alone. This meant that the most important information you could forage wasn't about the weather or animals. It was about the social standing of everyone around you. You needed to know who was angry at whom, who was sleeping with whom, and who had just broken a tribal rule. In the 1970s, anthropologist Polly Wiesner began a decades-long study of the Tskung San people in the Kalahari Desert. She found a fascinating split in how humans communicate. During the day, while people were working, about 75% of their conversation was practical. They talked about where the water was or how to fix a tool. But at night, around the fire, everything changed. That nighttime environment is where the seeking circuit truly went into overdrive. Wiesner found that 81% of firelight conversation was storytelling and social gossip. This wasn't just idle chatter. This was the group's way of mapping their social environment. By talking about people who weren't there, they were building a collective database of trust and reputation. They were foraging for social information. This is why you feel a physical compulsion to know what people are saying about you, or why you find it impossible to look away from a public scandal. Your brain believes that if you aren't up to date on the latest social movements, you are at risk of being exiled. The seeking circuit doesn't care that the people you are reading about live 5,000 miles away. To your ancient hardware, every face on a screen is a member of your tribe, and every conflict is a threat to your safety. The campfire eventually died out, replaced by high-resolution LED screens, but the change in technology didn't change the hardware of the human mind. It just removed the ceiling. We now live in an environment where the wind in the grass never stops rustling. Every scroll of a feed is a new patch of grass in the information foraging model. Every notification is a social signal that demands to be processed. In the past, the seeking circuit was a tool we used to stay alive. Now it has become a master we serve. Because the information never runs out, the loop never closes. The rat in the McGill study eventually collapsed because its physical body couldn't keep up with the artificial wanting in its brain. We are doing the same thing on a global scale. We are pressing the lever for 43,000 hours of our lives, not because we are enjoying it, but because we are evolutionarily incapable of turning the surveillance off. You might assume that when we aren't actively looking at a screen or a task, our brains are finally resting. But that is perhaps the biggest myth of all. In 2001, a neuroscientist named Marcus Raichle discovered something called the default mode network. He put people in fMRI scanners and told them to do absolutely nothing. He expected to see their brain activity drop to almost zero. Instead, he saw the brain light up like a Christmas tree. When you stop focusing on a specific task, your brain doesn't rest. It immediately switches back to the seeking circuit. It begins to forage through your memories, your worries, and your social standing. It starts simulating future scenarios and replaying past mistakes. Your brain's default state is not peace, it is surveillance. We are the only animals that forage through time, looking for information in the past and the future to ensure our survival in the present. This is why you feel that sense of unease when you are just sitting quietly. Your brain is a surveillance machine that is terrified of being idle. But even though the brain is wired to stay in surveillance mode, it was also designed to find what scientists call a stopping rule. In the wild, information foraging has to end when the cost of searching exceeds the potential reward. When an ancient human gathered enough information to feel safe for the night, the seeking circuit would quiet down. The social map was complete, the perimeter was checked, and the stomach was full. The problem with the modern world is that we have engineered a landscape where the stopping rule has been removed. There is no such thing as enough information in a digital environment. There is always one more post, one more news update, one more social signal. We are the first generation of humans who are running the seeking circuit at maximum power, 24 hours a day, with no biological off switch. This constant state of wanting without liking is what creates the modern feeling of being burned out yet unable to stop. We are exhausting our metabolic resources on a surveillance task that has no end point. We are like the rats with the bloody paws, pressing the lever for a reward that our biology tells us is just around the corner, even though we know intellectually that it isn't there. We have taken a survival mechanism that was designed to protect us from leopards and turned it into a mechanism that monitors the entire world's opinions simultaneously. The sheer scale of the information we are trying to forage is breaking the ancient hardware. Your brain was designed to track the movements of 50 people in a valley, not 8 billion people on a planet. When you look at it through this lens, our behavior doesn't look like an addiction or a failure of character. It looks like a biological tragedy. We are simply too good at being humans. We are too good at wanting, too good at foraging, and too good at social surveillance. We are using the very traits that allowed us to conquer the planet, but we are using them in a vacuum. The seeking circuit is a Ferrari engine being run in a parking lot. It's creating an incredible amount of heat and noise, but it isn't actually taking us anywhere. We are spending our 43,000 hours looking for a rustle in the grass that will never turn into a leopard, and waiting for a campfire conversation that will never lead to a deeper connection with our tribe. However, the most unsettling part of this isn't just that we are wasting time. It's what this behavior is doing to our ability to perceive the world around us. When the seeking circuit is constantly active, the liking circuit, the one that allows us to feel presence, satisfaction, and peace, atrophies. We become experts at anticipation but amateurs at experience. We are always living in the moment just before the reward. This is why even the most beautiful sunset or the most delicious meal can feel hollow if we don't document it or check for a social reaction to it. The brain treats the experience itself as less valuable than the information about the experience. We have become a species that prefers the map to the territory. We often tell ourselves that we can just put the phone down and go back to the way things were. But that ignores the reality of our biology. You cannot simply turn off 6 million years of evolution. The seeking circuit is not a choice. It is a fundamental part of your operating system. You cannot tell a bird to stop looking for worms, and you cannot tell a human to stop looking for information. The only thing we can change is the environment we are foraging in. We have to create our own stopping rules, not because we are weak, but because our brains are too powerful for their own good. We have to recognize when the rustle in the grass is just digital noise, and when the lever we are pressing is no longer connected to anything that matters. If we don't, we remain like those rats in the 1954 study. We will keep pressing the lever until our paws are bloody and our time is gone. We will continue to spend 20% of our energy on a surveillance task that provides no food, no water, and no safety. We are the only creatures on Earth that can be tricked into seeking our own exhaustion. And the most haunting part is that while we are busy looking at the flicker on the screen, searching for that one piece of information that will finally make us feel safe, we are missing the very life that the seeking circuit was supposed to protect. It is a strange paradox to realize that the behavior which allowed us to survive the savannah is the same behavior that makes it so hard to survive a quiet afternoon. But that is the human condition. We are survivors by nature, and survivors are never allowed to be truly at rest. We are always looking for the wing of a bird to flicker in the distance, always listening for a change in the wind, always waiting for the next social signal to tell us where we stand. The seeking circuit is the reason you are here, and it is the reason you can't stay still. In those 1954 experiments, there was a specific detail that often gets overlooked. The rats didn't just press the lever when they were hungry or tired. They pressed it even when they were in physical pain. They would cross an electrified grid, suffering agonizing shocks that would normally make any animal retreat in terror, just to reach that lever. Their survival instinct to avoid pain was completely overridden by the compulsion to seek. They weren't looking for a way out of the pain. They were looking for the next pulse of wanting. We like to think we are different. We like to think we are in control. But next time you feel that rising panic because you haven't checked your notifications, or that physical itch in your skull when the room goes quiet, remember the rat on the electrified grid. You aren't reaching for the phone because you expect to find something good. You are reaching for it because your ancient brain has decided that the pain of not knowing is worse than the cost of never stopping. The behavior we can never turn off was never meant to be a prison. It was meant to be a shield. But a shield is only useful if there is a sword to stop. In a world of infinite information, the sword never drops, and so the shield never comes down. We are exhausted not from the weight of our lives, but from the weight of our vigilance. We are still standing at the edge of the savannah, staring into the dark, waiting for a leopard that left 10,000 years ago. And the most haunting proof of this is that even as you hear these words, a part of you is already looking for what comes next. The ancient brain doesn't want you to be happy. It doesn't want you to be calm. It just wants you to be sure. And in a world that never stops changing, being sure is the one thing you will never be. So you will keep looking. You will keep scanning. You will keep foraging. Not because you are weak and not because you are addicted, but because you are a human being and you are doing exactly what you were built to do. The lever is always there. The only question is how many times you will press it before you realize the cage has no lock. Think about that the next time you find yourself scrolling at 3 in the morning, your eyes burning and your mind racing. You aren't looking for a post. You're looking for a leopard. You're waiting for the fire to tell you a story that will make you feel safe enough to sleep. But the fire is gone, and the leopards are all dead. All that's left is the loop. The same loop that started with a flicker of a bird's wing on the horizon 6 million years ago, and will end only when the last human finally closes their eyes. If you found this exploration of our ancient hardware interesting, there are plenty more rabbit holes to go down as we look at how our biology is trying to keep up with the modern world. Subscribe to join us for the next deep dive, and let us know in the comments. Do you feel the itch of the seeking circuit more in your social life or in the way you consume information? We'd love to hear your thoughts on how you find your own stopping rules. Until next time, try to remember that your brain isn't broken. It's just doing its job in a world it wasn't built for. Because at the end of the day, we are all just informivores, looking for a way to turn the surveillance off. And as we've seen, that might be the one thing we were never meant to do. The rat pressed the lever until its heart gave out, and while we might have better tools, we have the exact same heart.